What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in this video, I'm going to answer the question with my 25 some odd years of comic book knowledge. If I were leading the charge on Thor Love and Thunder, meaning I was the director, I had total creative control, the buck stopped here, right? I controlled every facet of the project. What would that movie look like? And I can tell you right now, it wouldn't look anything, well, maybe a little bit like the movie that we got, but it wouldn't feel like the movie that we got, right? So first things first, in terms of the tone of that film, it would be dark. It would be a dark movie. And I know a lot of you guys are probably like, really, man? Like coming out of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, you would do another dark film? Yes, I'm not against phase 4 having comedy. And in fact, I think we're long overdue for that. I think that we needed a phase that focused more on the comedic and lighthearted elements. For Thor, this needed to be a dark film. So let's look at Gore the God Butcher for a second. Well, let's talk about Gore the God Butcher. When it comes to Gorr in Thor Love and Thunder, the motivation for why he ended up becoming the being that he was not that dissimilar from the comics. The circumstances under which he became the God Butcher were different, but the motivation wasn't all that different, right? In the movie, you guys know how he became Gore the God Butcher in the movie, right? Like his daughter died and he finally went into the realm of his god, right? He met the god of his people and the god just kind of laughed at him and dismissed him and was like, your job is to suffer and die, right? There's no heaven for you, making fun of him and that kind of a thing. And then Gorr ends up getting the Necro Sword, which seems to basically be sentient, kind of have a life of its own. And then he kills the god and then decides that all other gods across the cosmos need to die because the plot called for it. In the comics, it's a little more guttural, right? It's a little more cerebral than that. It's the fact that Gorr had basically prayed to the gods alongside the tribe that he was in, that they prayed to the gods for rain, they prayed to the gods for sustenance, and sometimes they would answer, sometimes they wouldn't, but that Gorr basically came to believe that gods didn't exist, right? When he lost his family, he was like, the gods aren't real, because if gods were real and gods did love us, they wouldn't have us living in this terrible environment. He was ultimately outed by his people, literally kicked out of their nomadic tribe, and then he came across the body of two gods and realized gods are real. Now, technically one of them was Null, the symbiote god, but that's neither here nor there. You know, he basically came to the realization that gods are real, and the suffering that he and his people endured and the loss of his family was because, like, hey, the gods just don't really care, or maybe they like messing with you, whatever it is, the gods don't care about people. So the motivations between the comic and the film aren't really all that different. With the movie, I would have totally changed the entire motivation behind Gore the God Butcher. Because of the circumstances involving Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, I would have totally switched it up. Instead of Gorr being from like some desolate world where life was really, really harsh, what I would do is I would change things up to where the planet he was on was basically fine. It had a governing body and it had a culture and people were fed and watered and everything was great. And maybe they were more of like a religious culture than anything else. They were based more focusing on their godly beings and praying to them and that kind of stuff. But life was for the most part just kind of a utopia. But when Thanos snapped his fingers and blinked out half the life in the universe, half their population vanished. And what was a societal utopia, albeit based on a theocracy, gave way to religious zealotry. Suddenly, the people who were left were like, we've angered the gods somehow. We need to sacrifice people in order to make this work, right? I know it seems kind of weird, but it's not that far of a stretch. In times of desperation, people will believe what they want to believe. And so literally, Gore the God Butcher's family are some of those people who were sacrificed, and he has to watch as that happens. Now, where you would expect him to turn his anger towards the people who sacrificed his family, the question that he finds himself asking is, where are the gods in all this, right? Like, what's like, if the gods that we believe in, why didn't they protect us? Why didn't they protect my family or anything along those lines? The other thing here is, by whatever manner and whatever means, the all-black Necro Sword comes to Gorr. I don't know, but Gorr ends up finding his god, the god of his planet, and the god tells him it's because Thanos over on Earth, right, some backwater world, whatever it is, blinked out half the life in the universe or whatever it is. And the result of this is that half the universe's population has vanished, and your people have basically gone insane and sort of sacrificing people to me. But the god tells Gorr this in a way where he basically acts the same way that god did in the movie, where he's dismissive. If anything, it's actually kind of a source of entertainment. I love watching how your people just go crazy, right? And where this guy is sort of laughing and finding some measure of entertainment over the fact that Gorr's entire family was killed, Gorr lashes out and kills that god. Gorr then turns his attention to traveling across the cosmos, and he ends up finding out it's happening on every world. Every world across every galaxy and every solar system in some form or fashion has descended into madness and chaos. Now, this is an incredibly important plot point, not just for Gore the God Butcher, but for Thor himself, because with all of this going on, eventually Gorr would turn his attention to Omnipotent City. He would learn that there is a council of gods that meet however often, and he would literally go there, right? He would beseech the gods and say, like, I want to meet and speak with the gods, and maybe they, for whatever reason, they entertain him. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But he would basically show up there, and he would literally challenge the gods and ask, where were all of you when Thanos was dusting half the universe's population? Why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you step in? Why didn't you try to stop Thanos, right? Why is it that my people, half of our population were killed, they fell to religious zealotry, this world here fell, that world here fell, the universe was crumbling and falling, and the people who were praying to you were being ignored. And the response he gets, it's basically exactly how the gods acted in Thor Love and Thunder. That when you look at with Zeus popped up and all that kind of stuff, one, they meet in a giant golden temple. Zeus's introduction is flamboyant and it's flashy and it's just over the top. Clearly, the gods have bought into their own hype, and Gorr sees that. The gods are dismissive, the gods don't care, and so Gorr, that's when he would make his decision, gods everywhere need to die. What's the point of having you here if all you're going to do is ignore the people who pray to you and refuse to help them when you could? Now, this is an incredibly important plot point when it comes to Gorr. We'll talk about the whole plot point with Thanos and the snap and everything about Thor here in a second, but this is an incredibly important plot point when it comes to Gorr, because this makes him relatable. Because how many people, you, me, anybody else, have experienced some kind of situation where we've had a crisis of faith, where our belief in whatever God we believe in comes into question when we just kind of look at our own individual circumstances or the world around us and say, how kind could God really be? If this is how everything is, right? If this is the world we live in, how much could God really care? And when people, you and me and anybody else, when we find ourselves asking that question, and then we see Gorr in this movie asking that exact same question, and then getting a response by gods who are dismissive, we can totally understand his anger. We can totally understand his wrath. And instead of Gorr just being some guy who's pissy because his daughter died, he turns into a guy that's relatable. We almost kind of want to cheer him on. We don't necessarily do it because we understand the totality of what he would be doing, because in response to that, he would kill everybody in Omnipotent City. Not every single god, some would escape. Zeus might be powerful enough to survive and just kind of limp off to Olympus or whatever it is, but like he would just go on a warpath, just killing gods across Omnipotent City. And that right there would solidify just how powerful Gorr is, how powerful he's become using the all-black necro sword. And there'd be small little things to indicate in between, right? People, you would like literally, he would walk in and you'd see gods talking to each other like the all-black necro sword. Holy shit, how do you get that? Like that kind of a thing, like, dude, like, okay, like we need to be worried. And Gorr would just lash out and kill everybody. Now, as far as Thor, his journey would be whatever his journey is with the Guardians of the Galaxy until he starts learning that like gods are being killed, coming up on corpses of dead gods, different things like that, kind of what we saw in the movie. But this is where things get really, really interesting, is that once he learns that Gore the God Butcher is the one behind it, and once he learns the motivation of Gorr, it catches up to him. And that's why the Thanos snap is such an important plot point for Thor, because Thor has to come to grips with this realization. How foolish was it to believe that because Bruce Banner snapped his fingers and brought back everybody who was dusted, and Tony Stark snapped his fingers and wiped out Thanos and his forces, the day's saved and everything's okay and it's cool now, right? All is forgotten, right? Like, how foolish is it to believe that? How foolish was it to believe there was no blowback, that there were no lingering effects for the disappearance of half of the universe's population, that there had to be instances out there when this was going to somehow come back. And this affects Thor in particular. Why? Because Thor didn't aim for the head. That was the entire plot point for his character throughout the entirety of Avengers Endgame, and where you would have thought that movie was him coming to terms with the fact that he didn't aim for the head and that Thanos was finally defeated, he now has to reconcile with the fact this is just another thing piling on to the guilt he feels because of the fact that half the universe's population was even dusted in the first place. That was the whole pain that he had to endure. Half the universe was wiped out because of him, because of the fact that he didn't kill Thanos when he could have. That was the motivation for why he joined the team in the first place in Avengers Endgame. It's why he got fat playing video games, because he was just depressed, right? And when it was just a moment when he could finally get away from this, when it was a moment when he could finally come to terms with everything, now he has to deal with the fact that there are consequences for these actions. To make things even more complicated, Thor travels to Omnipotence City saying, okay, gods are being killed. We need to have some kind of a great big huge coming together of the various gods. When he gets there, he finds a tomb, right? He literally finds so many of these gods have been killed by Gorr. And so now it's really just kind of down to him, maybe Jane Foster and Valkyrie if you really want to throw him in there. But the reality here, it's personal for Thor, because this is him having to deal with all this. And so when you have this circumstance, when he finally catches up to Gorr, which I never would have invoked eternity as a wishing machine, right? Just a wishing statue with the center of the universe. I never would have done that, right? Like, it would have just been Thor versus Gorr. And this fight would have been an emotional fight for Thor. It would have been a very, very emotional fight. And the reason why is because Thor's conflicted. On one half, he understands why Gorr's doing what he's doing, because he knows the gods, and he knows that a lot of those gods out there really are just dicks, right? They really just don't care. That he's one of the very few gods out there who actually cares about humanity. But why is he a god who cares about humanity? Because he was cast down from Asgard by Odin and forced to live among humanity. That he hasn't spent his whole life removed from all things in existence. He hasn't spent his whole life removed from the very people that pray to him. Instead, he's lived among them. So that ties back into the nature of Thor, which shows how far he's progressed as a character over the course of the last however long he's been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So he understands to a degree where it is that Gorr's coming from. But at the same time, he can't just sanction a guy traveling around the cosmos killing every god he can find, because Thor knows it's only a matter of time before Gorr comes for him. So ultimately, it's a fight between Thor and Gorr. And it's literally one of these things where, like, you don't know if Thor's gonna make it out alive. Like, you don't know if he's gonna survive this whole thing. You're kind of like, dude, Thor might die here, man. Like, this might be the end of Odin's son. Now, ultimately, he does come out on top and he does win. But this is the most important element when it comes to Gorr. This is the most important thing. There is no moment at the end of this movie when Gorr witnesses Odin's son with Jane Foster and Odin's son chooses love, and then Gorr's heart grows 3 sizes bigger and he sees the error of his ways. That doesn't happen. That Gorr is irredeemable. He can't be fixed. He can't be saved, because he genuinely believes all the gods have to die. Like, the longer he does this and the further along this path he goes, the less it becomes about the gods don't care about people and the gods have to go. And the more it becomes just desire to kill. And we can literally tie this into the fact that he's just constantly being influenced by the Necrosword if we want to. We can go any number of ways to make this happen. But the overall gist is whatever path we choose for this corruption of Gorr, by the time you get to the end of the movie, there is no saving him. And Thor tries to bring him back, because it's less about Thor trying to actually save Gorr, and it's more about Thor trying to exonerate himself, trying to get rid of this guilt. And if he can save Gorr, then it makes up for everything that he did. It makes up for the fact that he didn't aim for the head, and he can finally get rid of this last bit of guilt. But instead, Gorr can't be saved. He can't be redeemed. There's no bringing him back. And the only option that Thor has is to kill Gorr. Now, I'm not saying the movie has to end on a super bleak note. It can end on some measure of a positive note. I don't care what kind of note they ended on, but the overall significance of this is that it is Thor having to come to terms with the fact of accepting what happened. Him having to accept the fact that he could have aimed for the head and he didn't aim for the head. And what happened, happened. And instead of trying to hide from it, instead of joining the Guardians of the Galaxy and running away from it, Thor has to accept it. That sometimes we just don't do the right thing when we could do the right thing. And there are consequences to be paid for that. But coming to terms with that and learning to understand that and make peace with the past, that's just a part of living. And so that's how I would have handled that film. The pacing and everything, I think it had a little too much comedy, right? I mean, it can have some comedic elements, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be like an overly dark story, but that's what this would be. It would be Thor, it would be Gore the God Butcher being the main villain of the story, but it would basically be Thor having to come to terms with it. It would be one of the incredibly rare instances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe when I'm actually okay with a villain dying, because the villain of Gorr has less to do with Gorr being Gorr, and it has more to do with Thor's journey and coming to peace with his journey. Gorr dying, that's fine, right? In this instance, I'm okay with that. I do have ideas where Gorr should live, and in all honesty, I'm not overly against Gorr living, but I think in this instance, because the movie would be more about Thor's journey, Gorr should probably die at the end. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.